Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'd like to introduce and welcome you to this important discussion about being a startup on the global stage. And we have a great set of speakers here today. I know some of you are just joining, and so we'll share a little bit about what we're doing at Equal Innovation, and then talk to you and introduce our speakers as well. What we hope for today with this webinar is to really start the discussion about the important role that prize challenges, accelerators, and startups play together in bringing big policy issues to the forefront of the global stage, to the attention of world leaders, and to really towards making progress on the various goals that we're all working on. As you know, for example, in a few weeks, the world will be meeting in Dubai for the COP28 climate change conference, and there'll be a lot of discussion about how do we address different aspects of climate change. And at some point, they'll look around and they'll say, who has the technology to actually make this happen? And who's actually working on solutions that will help us get to a reduction in our greenhouse gas levels, or put up seawalls, or actually track what we're doing to the environment. And so that's why for us, it's been so important that Equal Innovation be a part of those discussions and bring the various startups that we interact with to the global stage. And we're fortunate here today to have Banofi Leather and Brazilian team, two such startups who are really doing very important work around the world. They're in Hult Prize benefactor for Banofi, and an X Prize, which I'm involved with, a supporter, and hopefully benefactor for Brazilian team in the near future. I want to share a little bit about Equal Innovation, just real quick for everybody, for those of you who don't know us. And so I'll just have a few slides to share with you. So the problem we're trying to solve in the world is that there's a lot of entrepreneurship going on all around the world, and yet the vast majority of funding and the vast majority of ecosystems remain in just a few countries, big countries, big cities and big countries around the world, whether it's Boston, where I am, New York, San Francisco Bay Area, obviously, London, Bangalore, Beijing. But there's actually high quality startups everywhere now, and most universities have accelerator programs. Countries are developing their economic strategies around startups and innovation. And yet a lot of those startups, simply by location, are not being connected to the global conversation. The second issue we address is the rise of impact-oriented startups, which is not just social entrepreneurship. It's also could be very technical, very scientifically advanced solutions to complex challenges like climate change, or addressing a pandemic that might happen, unfortunately, in the future. And so as we think about that, a lot of the early stage funding for that comes from philanthropy, from other sources. And we try to identify and source those startups and solutions, and then connect them to the funding sources and partners that they're often looking for. So we worked with foundations in the past. We worked with impact investors. And through examples like the G20, we work with government agencies. And so we really do three things at Equal Innovation. One is we've built this innovation scouting network around the world. And so there's about 5,000 accelerators that we reach out to worldwide, and that includes universities, accelerators, economic development agencies, hospitals, and government-run lab systems like the National Institute of Health in the United States. We also do events. We've worked at the G20, obviously. We did a large event with over 40 startups from 15 countries, and about 10 government executives from Japan, India, the United States, elsewhere, that came and spoke to the group. And then we do smaller research-oriented projects for funders who are specifically looking for startups in a specific area, and we work together to help them scan the globe, if you will, to find what they're looking for. So just some recent examples that I wanted to share with everyone. The Impact G20X event we had at the G20 was one example of that, where we hosted the event. We also worked with Clinton Global Initiative, where I was a senior fellow until recently as well, where we identified about half the startups that participated in their Clinton Global Initiative greenhouse program. And of those half, actually, we continued to get half selected, half nominated, half selected. And actually 3 of the 4 winners came from our network, ultimately, for that event. Hult Prize has been a great partner, and we were excited to have 3 of the finalists for Hult Prize attend our G20 event in Delhi. And then the Sustainable Development Goals are a partner of ours with the UN, where before we've actually brought startups to New York for the events that they do around the UN General Assembly to showcase, again, the role of innovation in addressing global challenges. So I'll stop there with my talking. And what I'd like to do is, start with Laurie Van Dam, who's the CEO of Hult Prize. And I first got to know Laurie 2 years ago. I've known Hult Prize for many years. Got to know Laurie. She comes from a great organizational background, having run the Susan Komen Fund for breast cancer, having run the One Fund, or been part of the leadership team at the One Fund, which supported victims of the Boston Marathon bombing, and really understands the role of large organizations in strategically supporting those groups that can benefit from it, whether it's researchers or now social entrepreneurs and startups. And so I want to start with Laurie. Laurie, if you could talk a little bit about Hult Prize for our audience, and also a little bit about the process and why it's so unique in this space.
Well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be with all of you and to share something that I'm incredibly proud of and very fortunate to be a part of, which is called the Hult Prize. And we are a student social entrepreneurship competition. We are global. Annually, we have about 10 to 11,000 startups that are proposed in the Hult Prize early stages, and we go through a series of selection steps to get to our 6 global finalists, of whom you have our winner of $1 million present with us today that you'll hear from in a moment. I think there are several things that we think are really important that help Hult Prize have kind of a unique place in the kind of overall landscape of innovation prizes. First, we're solely focused on students. So participants have to be enrolled in a degree granting program in order to participate. That doesn't mean that they aren't also, many of them, already very advanced in their entrepreneurship journeys and running their companies while they are studying. But it is, I think, kind of a testament both to where we come from. So the funding for the Hult Prize is given by the Hult family. The Hult family started a business called EF Education 60 years ago. And EF Education is an educational, as it sounds, company that does language education, travel, cultural exchange, all sort of experiential learning opportunities. And so the idea that we are part of the educational system, I think, is really core, and the experiential part of the education system. But also, that we know that there's a lot of innovation prizes out there that don't focus on the greater purpose, people and planet. Our core belief is that the solutions to the problems that the world is facing are not going to come from NGOs, even though I personally have a long background in NGOs and nonprofits. But the solution has to really incorporate for-profit businesses. So we think it's a really important mission to, whether someone participates as a startup or just comes and learns about us at a campus-based event, that we are spreading the word that you can both do well and do good, right? That you can both have a for-profit business and be contributing positively to people and planet. So I think those are some of the things that I would say are sort of key to how we view our role in the world.
Laurie, while you're speaking, can you talk a little bit about the finals that you just had and how that worked out?
You bet. So we do have our big annual showcase event, which is our global finals. In 2022, we had them in Paris because the topic for the 2023 for the 22-23 program year was sustainable fashion. And we thought, where else could you, really find an ecosystem that is committed to both fashion and sustainable fashion. And we had our event the week before Fashion Week. So there was a lot of kind of opening buzz in Paris already around these kinds of opportunities. We were incredibly honored to have the announcement of the winner made by Stella McCartney, who is, of course, an icon in sustainable fashion. And she spoke a lot about her standpoint very early on in her career to not use leather from animals, and was beyond excited when the announcement of the winner came to her, and she found out that Janali and her team at Banofi Leather, who are making vegan leather products, were in fact the team selected by our panel of judges to win the $1 million. So it was a really inspirational event. All 6 teams pitch on the global stage. It's live streamed, so anyone, anywhere can watch it. And we love having that opportunity to kind of share what we're about. In 2024, we will be in London for our global finals, which we're also super excited about. And in 2024, we have made the topic unlimited. So anyone can propose a startup as long as it addresses the SDGs, so that we hope to be able to kind of advance the process of trying to achieve the SDGs, which we all know is something that we have a very tight deadline to achieve.
Great, thanks, Lori. And actually, that's a great segue to Janali, who's here representing Banofi Leather. So Janali, if you could talk a little bit about the origins of your company, the support you got maybe at Yale as well, in terms of nurturing, because I think for us, it's important to recognize the role of the accelerators as well. They're our key partners in finding different startups for all of the groups involved here today. And then what's life been like the last few weeks since you won $1 million, and how has that gone?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me as well. So maybe I'll tell you a little bit about the startup and then our journey. So Banofi is a climate tech startup that creates a plant-based leather alternative from banana crop waste. I obviously have samples, and so this is what it looks like. It looks, feels, smells like animal leather, but it has a 95% carbon emission reduction compared to animal leather, 99% water use reduction. And essentially, it is a sustainable alternative that is made from crop waste. So we provide farmers with additional income in rural India. And we're excited to kind of create something that's scalable and sustainable. So that's what we're doing at Banofi Leather. How this began, every startup has a weird origin story, I'm sure, but the short version is that I had done my undergrad in chemistry. I'd worked for a little bit at McKinsey, and then I went back to school at Yale, to the School of Environment, to kind of study climate change and see how I could make a difference tangibly. And fashion was always something where, even if I wanted to be sustainable, I knew what I was buying was polyester. I knew that, the dyes were polluting rivers in India. I knew that my leather bag was an orchid for the environment, but there just weren't enough alternatives. And that's kind of how we started thinking about this. So the team includes a bunch of other people from Yale, Maggie, Isabel, who come from the world of fashion, chemistry as well. And so when we wanted to take this forward, that's kind of, we started with an idea of creating plant-based leather alternative. Initially, it was from wheat straw, and because of all the stubble burning in India. And we went about it very much through some of those Yale accelerators. We pitched for the sustainability prize at Yale, and then we won an initial $20,000. I went back to that in my first summer at Yale, kind of found a small shed, bought 2 machines, hired 3 people who were all recent graduates of leather technology, which is a specific degree that I hadn't heard of before. And we basically started there, constantly pitched for grants, and so kind of collected small pots of money to keep us going month on month. As we had this traction, Maggie, Isabel, Nidhi, all got involved, and that was around the time of the Hult Prize application. So it was in December, middle of a winter storm in New Haven, where we were like, should we do it? Should we skip it? It's so late, like it's so cold. And that's kind of when we said, no, we have to do this. This year's topic is sustainable fashion. It could not be more perfect. And so we did that. We'd been talking to somebody, Michael from Lori's team, who'd reached out to us. And so the process, once we applied, we heard back, and there were a lot of stages. So there was a summit round where there was about 20 locations all over the world where 100 startups pitched in New York, the location we were at. And then 2 startups got selected. From there, we went into like a month-long digital accelerator with mentorship. And so it was like a process where we really transformed the business over the course of this year. I think that kind of having those check-ins, those mentorship sessions, those something to hold you accountable while you're a student, is really helpful. And so that's kind of how we've grown. Today, now we're a team of 20 in India. We are currently kind of moving from small lab scale to pilot stage. We filed our patents. We're kind of at that cusp now, and we're really excited because the Hult Prize now has given us a lot of kind of momentum that we hope to use over the next year to kind of scale this into a manufacturing facility, teams, sales teams, and we're allowed to now think bigger, which is really helpful.
That's great. Thanks for sharing that story. We'll come back to that process questions. Before I turn it over to Paulo to talk about Brazilian team, I'll just talk a little bit about X Prize as well. The X Prize was started about a little over 20 years ago, and it was built around private space travel and the idea that why should government be the only funder of space travel? And it wasn't a political thing. It was really just how do you nurture and catalyze more funding for private space travel, for R&D in space through philanthropy. And so that X Prize was $10 million to develop some privately develop some vehicles for launching into lower orbit on planet Earth, and it actually catalyzed several $billion as a result of it. So the initial 10 million catalyzed about 90 million at the time for private projects, mostly R&D at universities and elsewhere into space travel. But over time, it attracted people like Richard Branson and Jeff Bezos, who have much more resources. And now, of course, it does attract billions of dollars. And so the X Prize's role has really been to catalyze solutions in areas where there's historically been a need or opportunity, but not necessarily a lot of funding for the innovation side of it. And so recently, I've been working with them as chair of their co-chair of their Future of Learning challenge, which is looking at education and why technology and innovation in education doesn't necessarily scale the way we all would like, and what's the role that an X Prize can play in catalyzing funding. And so it's a great opportunity to turn it over to Paulo, who, like with Banofi, was with us in Delhi. And they are one of the finalists for the X Prize Rainforest Challenge, which again is a perfect example of where X Prize likes to play. Rainforests are a critical part of the global environment, the ecosystem. They are necessary for the air we breathe, and yet it's not something that venture capitalists are going to necessarily look at in the traditional sense. And so it's important to have prize challenges that catalyze this sort of support. So with that, Paulo, let me turn it over to you, and I'll make sure you're able to share your screen as well. So please go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Nish. And thanks once again for inviting us to participate in this webinar. It's a pleasure to be here and explain a little bit of our team and our initiatives and our technology and what we are looking forward in the future. So I have a presentation here with me. I'm gonna share my screen. Just a minute, please. Okay, guys. So I'm from Brazil. I'm a professor at the Federal University of São Carlos, and I'm also coordinator of CPGEL, which is a lab for geotechnologies here at my university. And I'm one of the leaders of the remote sensing and drone experts inside the Brazilian team, and we are competing in the X Prize Rainforest. As Nish was telling you, we have like an objective of sampling 100 hectares of forest, of tropical forest, in 24 hours. but without setting foot inside this forest. So that's the main objective of getting a species list of 100 hectares of forest, of tropical forest, of high biodiversity forests for both flora and fauna. And this is something that is traditionally done on foot inside the forest and may take up to months or even years for you to get a census of what is inside of this forest. And the problem is that you all must know is that we are losing forests, tropical forests, in a rhythm which is a lot higher than what we are actually studying of these forests. So X Prize Rainforest is a prize that is telling the competitors, please give us technology, give us methods of doing research and gathering information of these forests before we lose them, so we can know what's inside, and maybe this will help us protect, but not also protect, but also give value for what is inside of this forest, the biodiversity that is inside of this forest. So the Brazilian team has developed a few technologies that we are deploying these last 3 to 4 years. Mainly, we have robots and we have drones that have autonomous methods of gathering data inside of these forests during the 24-hour period. After we gather all of this data from inside the forest or over the forest, we bring this data back inside the 24-hour fieldwork plan, and we have 48 hours to do an analysis. So what exactly are we extracting from this forest? Well, we are extracting bioacoustics, we are extracting leaf samples, but we are also gathering litter samples and photographs and remote sensing images and so on. And this is helping us process and get this information from fauna and flora during the 48-hour analysis. Now, what I've said is that we have robotics and we have remote sensing gathering the data, but we also have bioacoustics, eDNA, biodiversity analysis, Flora Viewer, which we're calling is like a dashboard, and all of these center boxes there do the processing and give us the list of species and also insights on what these species mean for cultural or for economical values from this forest. We started X Prize 3 to 4 years ago, and we were something of around 800 teams that subscribed to go to X Prize Rainforest. And last May, June of this year, 2023, we went to the semifinals along with another 13 teams. And a few months ago, we received the news that we are one of the finalists. So the Brazilian team is one of the 6 finalist teams that are going to the finals, which will occur in the Amazon in July of 2024. So this is part of our teams with part of our robots and drones that was gathering data in the 24-hour period in Singapore. So the semifinals was in Singapore. And well, one special thing about our team is that we are representing not only all of the Southern Hemisphere, but we are also representing all of Latin America, and we are representing all of the countries that actually have tropical forests. All of the other teams are either from the US, Spain, or Switzerland. So we have a very important role in these semifinals. And another special thing is that the finals are actually going to be in Brazil, in the Brazilian Amazon. So again, that's another thing that's weighing on us. I'm just going to show you a few of our achievements and our developments. So we are developing drones, but we are also developing robots and domes that gather the data that we are interested in. So we have, for example, domes that are used to be placed on top of forest canopy to gather sounds and climate data. We have ground robots for getting litter and taking photos and bioacoustics. But we also have drones that are actually gathering leaf samples from the trees that we need to look at. And from the remote sensing and drones part of the team, which I'm leading, we are interested in gathering data from orbital sensors, so satellites, but we are also deploying drones with autonomous achievements of gathering RGB images, LiDAR data, multispectral and hyperspectral data. What we do with all of this is that we do 3D scans of the forest to gather carbon stocks, so we can actually see how much carbon is inside of that forest, and we can transform this into value, money. We are using artificial intelligence along with PlantNet to recognize the species of each of the forest canopy species that we are looking at. We are also doing biodiversity indexes to know inside of the 100-hectare plots, where do we have more or less biodiversity, so we can actually also say that biodiversity is not a general spatial analysis. It's actually very specific. We have places where there's more biodiversity than other places. And we're doing all of this based on science. So I haven't told you, but we're around 80 scientists working on this team, where most of us are professors and researchers at university level. So all of our achievements are based on scientific publications that we are doing and have been doing for the last 10 to 15 years. But we have had a lot of achievements in the last 5 years, especially because of the X Prize enforcements, right? Because of this competition. So we are using, for example, LiDAR. Many of you probably know, some might maybe not know what it is, but it's a light detection and ranging. So we're talking about scanning 3D model of a forest. And by this, we can have the carbon estimates of this forest, but we also use hyperspectral data to know the biodiversity, spatially distributed throughout the landscape. We are also using a lot of artificial intelligence, not to only recognize where the trees are, but also recognizing what species of trees we are looking at. And we are doing this using deep learning algorithms like convolutional neural networks to segment these images. And I'll show you in a minute what we're talking about. This is, for example, an example of artificial intelligence that we are using now in Brazil to recognize pine trees that are invasive species here in Brazil. So pine trees is not native to Brazil, but they are colonizing areas that shouldn't be colonized by an invasive species such as pine trees. So we're using artificial intelligence to actually map where all of these pine trees are located, so we can actually look into how to remove them later on. So this is an example of a large area of around 100 hectares full of pine trees, invasive species here in Brazil. And we can use this same technology in the X Prize. This is another example where this photo in the right side is a photo done by a drone, and you can actually see an ant walking on the leaf here. And this is the kind of high definition image that we are taking with our special drones. And using these high definition images flown by an autonomous drone, we can use PlantNet, which is another artificial intelligence algorithm, to recognize what species we are looking at this photo. And this has been working very well. And we are using this not in a manual mode. We are doing this in FloriViewer, which is a software, a platform that does this online web-based analysis. So all of these images can be taken by a drone. That can be a commercial drone. You can just take out the SD card, put it online on a Google Drive, for example, and the FloriViewer platform will process this online and give you a feedback on the species that you are looking at. So this is an example of a process done at FloriViewer where we are recognizing palm trees automatically using drone images taken in the field. It is another example of the tree crowns that are automatically recognized by the drones and by FloriViewer. So we're giving a positive impact on biodiversity, recognizing how much biodiversity we have on these forests of ours. So this is really quick, but I'm also available to have a discussion more on this. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Paulo, for that explanation, and really amazing technology that you're developing. Both teams are developing amazing technology. So I want to just kickstart with some questions, but welcome other folks to write their questions in the chat or to raise their hand as well. So let's start just to continue the conversation with Paulo. There's two challenges I'd like you to address. One is you're now sort of being asked, different organizations around the world are interested in your technology. There's R&D to be done around it. There's products to be developed out of it. How are you dealing with this new opportunity to grow? And within the context of the 80 people you mentioned, or 80 different organizations, so how do you package that into products in your next stage? And then how do you address the probably significant demand for this that's out there?
Yeah, so we haven't gotten to that stage yet, since we're still inside the competition. Most of our findings are still not being they're not publicly available or even commercially available, because we are keeping them kind of as a secret, at least until the finals, which is in July of 2024. But we are already looking at the possibilities of this becoming either commercial, because there is that possibility, but also of making it a public public knowledge. Because since we are mostly researchers in universities, and since universities here in Brazil are mostly public, most of this technology is being done using public money from the public universities. So most of this technologies will become papers and will become scientific knowledge and will become publicly available. But we do have an opportunity to make some of these findings commercially available. But we as a team are not yet discussing this, because we are expecting to do this after the finals.
Great. And I think that's an important point to raise, that it doesn't have to be a traditional venture model, raise, build. There's other ways to have the impact side of things, which sometimes involves making it a open source or publicly available technology. Same question for you, Janali, and I think Nidhi was on for a little bit as well. I don't see her now, but same question for you. You have this, global recognition now, the Hult Prize victory, the recognition that goes with that, the technology, the products are there, they're real. So what's next for you, and how do you, navigate what hopes to be, great demand for what you're building?
Yeah, I think where we've been until now for the last 2 years was we were an R&D team. So it was about 8-10 of us chemists and material scientists working together to figure this out. I think now we're thinking about building out other form as we grow as a business, right? So I know this is all typical for traditional businesses, but building out a small production facility, how do you manage that? Supply chains, procurement, that whole aspect from finance, somebody to handle our finances now that we're ordering all these materials. And so I think it's very much small business problems still, which is like getting some of that basic infrastructure so that we scale from what we were, which is a lab, to an actual functioning business that is ready to scale and grow. But that's kind of the focus right now.
And have you learned lessons or from other plant-based products and businesses? Are there things now that we're in maybe the next second 5 years of that world that you will sort of take in and apply to your own work?
Yeah, absolutely. We're not the first to do this. So plant-based leather companies like plant-based meat have existed for about 5 to 10 years. Majority of them are based in the US, in Silicon Valley, working on technologies that involve mycelium or bacterial cellulose or, cultured animal cells that they take from live animals and then culture them to create exactly as leather. And so a lot of what we saw was these are very technologies focused on a luxury segment because they're expensive, hard to scale. And so what we've done very differently is we kind of found a niche where we said, okay, how can we as consumers buy these things? Can we create something scalable? And so has been a lot of learning. I think the process of and we didn't start with this. We started saying we wanted to be the luxury bag, you know, selling to luxury bags. So I think a lot of this has evolved through the process of Hult, other grants, like constantly pitching, getting questioned on the business model, the applicability, the white space that you are finding has been a big process of iterating, figuring out if, and I'm not sure this is the right, and it might change 2 weeks from now, probably will, but that whole process of kind of iterating and learning.
Great. And to bring you in, Lori, on this, what was it that ultimately the judges saw about Banofi that, you know, do you think led to the win, as much as you can share? And secondly, you know, what does Hult Prize do now with its winners, you know, as they move along this journey? Obviously, there's, you know, some things you can do, some things you can't, but can you talk a little bit about both of those things?
Sure. So our model is highly unusual in that we don't actually select the winner. And I was not actually present when the discussion happened. So I can't tell you what it was that caused the judges to select Banofi over the other 5 finalists. I can tell you what put them in that room, which, you know, one of the things that we really prioritize is the team. And one of the really great advantages of having everybody in person for a couple of weeks before the global finals is the chance to really talk to everybody. But even through the digital earlier phase of the accelerator that Janelle was mentioning, you know, we started to get to know kind of the strengths and weaknesses of the individuals on the team. We know that businesses will pivot, and you know, even Janelle was mentioning earlier on in Banofi's journey, it wasn't about using banana fibers. It was looking at wheat, you know, the remains of the wheat harvest first. So really getting focused on the business idea can lose sight of the fact that we as entrepreneurs need to be able to pivot. And so we're really looking for talent. And, you know, as with all of the teams that made it to the global finals, you know, there was a real clear and shining example of a group of co-founders who were working effectively together, that had complementary skills, that had the right kinds of experience to make this a successful startup. And then, you know, as far as once the decision has been made and we've announced our winner, it's very customized. So our winners have been at all different stages in their evolution as businesses. They've been in different industries with, you know, different theories of change. So we try to really customize that. We don't have, unlike some accelerators, we don't have a really built out standard process that we expect folks to follow. One of the activities that we had during our accelerator phase was to mock up what $1 million spend would look like over time. And so that is what kind of the blueprint for how we can keep working together. But we're also really clear that we don't know how to run a plant-based leather business. So we're not going to try and get involved in any kind of day-to-day operational decisions. It's really just, you know, our role is to fund and to do the kind of minimal due diligence that's required to confirm that the money is going where it says it's going and not to vacations in Tahiti. But other than that, we're pretty hands-off.
Yeah, and just to add, I think that the organizers for Hult are a little bit hands-off, but the mentors that they get in are very hands-on, and to the point where they knew, let's say, our founders agreement, they knew who's gonna be involved, how are we gonna take this forward. Like, it was a lot of, how can we help you? Hult is one part of your journey. How can we set you up to create a successful business? And so I think all the startups that had reached that top 6 or even that top 20 phase, everybody had a pilot, everybody had a model, like a team, a good team. Everybody had a lot of those essential checkbox things. And then it was more about, okay, what is your plan to get there? Really testing each and everything that we said, because we were pitching every week for about 6 weeks, changing our pitches. We were in person then for 3 to 4 weeks in Paris, where again, we were pitching pretty much almost every 2 days. So there was a lot of, how can we help you? Hult is one part of your journey. How can we help you create a successful business? Because Hult is out there to kind of create social entrepreneurship organizations that are changing the world irrespective of whether they win the prize or not. So I think we also kind of looked at it like, okay, as a learning opportunity. So there was an expert on finance, and there was an expert on organizational culture, and there were things that we weren't considering that we were forced to think about. And yeah.
That's great. And again, if folks have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. So Paulo, I'll ask you a sort of an odd question, but suppose you don't win the $5 million X Prize. You still made it to the finals, one of the top solutions to, help rainforests in the world out of having participated in X Prize, extraordinarily rigorous multi-year process to get to this stage. So how have you all thought about next steps in terms of what you'll do, if you get this exposure in this global networks, but not necessarily the cash?
Okay, that's a good question. So it's funny thing is that we are, even if we win the prize money is not going to our own pockets. We have signed an agreement inside of our team that if we do win the prize money, this will go to a fund to fund more research in technology deployments for biodiversity studies in the Amazon and the Atlantic forest here in Brazil. So we're not actually going for the prize money. We are going for the research and for the methods and the technology that this is allowing us to develop. If we win, great, because we'll have more money to do more research and apply more of this technology. If we don't, it has been a great time doing this, and we'll keep doing it using public funding or private funding for the research. What we want in the end is that all of this technology being developed is to actually be applied in tropical forests. So that's what we are actually aiming for, is for the application of the technology being developed. And we believe that this is already happening, because we have been approached by companies and by the governments that they need this technology to be deployed in the field as early as possible. So that's great. It's already working.
That's great. And how do you imagine, just as a follow-up on that, if you end up licensing this, how do you ensure that the drone technology is used for the right, when you map the Amazon, that it's not used, for example, by extractionary organizations that are looking to figure out where they can go in and swoop up plants and or minerals or whatever that may have pure for-profit purposes. So how do you think about some of those challenges that are there?
I think those are governmental challenges. So Brazil, for example, has a very rigorous law for biodiversity extraction. So that already takes care of that problem, at least here in Brazil. But we should be looking elsewhere, not only in Brazil. So I think governments need to tackle this issue by themselves. They need to have policies and laws that guarantee that this biodiversity is being studied and not trying to be extracted from their countries. So it's more of a governmental issue, I guess.
Great. And Janali, a question for you. We know that you won't be using the funds for travel to Tahiti, but what are the core buckets around which you'll be using this prize money to build the company, and what are sort of the next steps on that?
I think the broad buckets are manufacturing scale up, further R&D, and then investing in a sales team. I think when we pitched during Hult was 2 months ago, and things might have changed. So like a little bit of like where that sales team is going to be, or in R&D, what is that between R&D and manufacturing? I think also because the funds come in more staggered, it kind of helps us plan a little bit better, because 3 months from now, we might say, okay, forget the sales. We just want to focus on R&D, like get that right. The rest will fall into place. So I think that there's that flexibility now as we kind of plan to say, okay, we do have funding for some of those big decisions, and then we can kind of think about how to prioritize. But yeah, those are the 3 broad areas. I don't think that would change.
And just a follow up, and again, you may not know the answer to this yet, but there's you have a market like India where there's a lot of vegetarians, a lot of interest in this type of a product. You have the United States where you have the Tesla Beyond Burger crowd that is interested in paying a little bit more for plant-based products. Like, how do you think about such different markets, both of where there would be enormous impact if you're able to get a foothold?
Yeah. And maybe just taking a step back, there are kind of three types of leather. There's animal leather, there is vegan leather, but 99% of vegan leather today is plastic. And then there's plant-based, which are these new startups that are trying to innovate using crop waste. And so while India is a market, there's a lot of vegan leather, but at the end of the day, it's also a relatively cost-conscious market. And so some of these technologies were a little bit more expensive, a little bit more experimental, might take a little bit of time. So we're thinking focused on the US and Europe, and very much focused on fashion houses. So they're the ones who also are looking for these alternatives. So it's a match both from a demand and supply point of view. Longer term, would love to get into auto furniture, and that's where we see the growth coming from.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great. Any last comments that anyone would like to make? Things I didn't ask about, or plug for the organization?
I think just one thing that I did not know before I went to grad school was how many opportunities there are for students. And I think most students don't know. And I know that because you'll work in the education sector, having resources like, oh, here are like the 50 different grants you could apply for if you wanted to start a business, would be good, because I think we had to kind of collect a lot of that information. There were local competitions, hackathons, Rice Business School has one, MIT's Climate Prize has one. There was just so many opportunities, but it's not very well structured at an overall level where somebody says, okay, going to university is also a great time to work on a business idea. And I think that now, in hindsight, I was like, thank God I started while I was in university, because there were so many opportunities that I would never have been able to leverage. So, yeah.
Right. There's about 2,000 innovation centers and startup accelerators amongst the university communities around the world. So it's quite a large. Pretty much any major higher education institution worldwide now has a entrepreneurship cell or a pitch competition or something more comprehensive, and that's that's great for young people to experiment, whether or not they run with that startup idea or not. It's a great place to experiment and understand the challenges.
Yeah, and I actually, in that vein, I think it's one of the things we really pride ourselves on is that we're not just speaking to the MBAs, we're not just speaking to the business school students, and Janelle is a great example of that. The idea that the business world needs people with specific skills, and particularly when technology is going to be a huge part of the innovations that we need to really impact climate change. We really want to use our prize and the competition that goes along with it as a way to engage students in lots of different programs in the process of coming up with business ideas. So the winner of the North America kind of campus-based program of the year this year is actually the Savannah College of Art and Design, which is not a place where you necessarily think, oh, of course, they're going to have a lot of students who are interested in starting businesses. And the campus director there did face some headwinds in the beginning, getting folks on board, but through the process, he really was able to get a lot of support across campus. And I think that's something that we really feel good about.
Great. Thank you so much, Lori, Janali, and Paolo for participating. I think that was great insights, both on the role of prizes, the role of sort of a collaborative, group of innovations, the way the Brazilian team is doing, and sort of a impact-oriented startup, the way Banofi Leather is doing. So I want to thank all of you for participating, and we will be doing our next webinar in early December in the follow-up to COP28 to hear from a few startups and the accelerators they're associated with, to understand some of the outcomes of COP28 and what the role of innovation and startups will be in that. So look forward to sharing more information about that. And thanks to all of you for participating.
Thanks for having us. Have a good day, everybody.